Now that we've gone over how a tree produces food and obtains the materials required for growth and survival, we're going to examine the different reproductive strategies that trees may utilize. Trees may reproduce sexually through the production of seed or by vegetative reproduction, also known as sprouting. So trees that maintain their reproductive organs within flowers are referred to as angiosperms. This is the category that our hardwood or deciduous trees fall into, maple species, oak species, etc. Trees that maintain their reproductive organs within cones are referred to as gymnosperms. This category includes our softwood or conifer species, the pine species, spruce species, hemlock species, etc. Vegetative reproduction is pretty much limited to deciduous species, though some conifers do have the ability to sprout. So these trees maintain what are known as adventitious vegetative buds at the base of the stem, along the stem, or along the roots of the tree. And following a disturbance that results in major injury or tree mortality, these buds sprout. Red maple is a really good example of a common tree in the eastern United States that sprouts from the stump rather vigorously after the parent tree is harvested or killed for some other reason. This slide shows a stand of American beech, and American beech is a species that has the ability to sprout from both the stump and from the roots following a major disturbance. So all sprouts are clones, and so they're genetically identical to the parent. The sprouting is a really important competitive mechanism for many deciduous trees that are trying to become established after an ecological disturbance. So again, just to reiterate, angiosperms are trees that maintain their reproductive organs within flowers. And so within angiosperms, within flowers, the stamen is the male sexual organ. So it is the male sexual organ within the flower. The pistil is the female sexual organ within the flower. Pollination refers to the transfer of the male reproductive cell, which is pollen, from the stamen to the female reproductive cell, which is the ovule within the pistil. Fertilization occurs when the ovule develops into a seed within a fruit. So seeds disperse once the fruit becomes ripe through a variety of mechanisms. New trees develop once those seeds germinate under favorable environmental conditions. This slide just illustrates the different parts of the flower. And again, the parts we're focusing on are the stamen, the male reproductive organ within the flower, and the pistil, the female reproductive organ. And as we'll see next, some flowers maintain both male and female organs. Some flowers maintain just one or the other. Flowers that maintain both stamen and pistil are referred to as perfect flowers. Imperfect flowers lack one or the other. Tree species are either classified as monoecious, where individual trees maintain both male and female reproductive organs on the same tree, or dioecious, where individual trees maintain only one or the other. So monoecious trees may maintain either perfect or imperfect flowers. But again, both male and female organs are present on the same individual. By definition, dioecious species always maintain imperfect flowers because both male and female organs don't exist on the same individual. In contrast to angiosperms, gymnosperms maintain reproductive organs within cones rather than flowers. Individual cones can either be male or female. Pollination occurs within the female cone, and naked seeds grow within the cone rather than surrounded by a fruit, as is the case with angiosperms. Seeds are dispersed as cones open. Some cones open seasonally when the seed is mature, while others require really specific environmental stimuli, like heat as a result of fire, to open. So cones that require a specific environmental stimuli to open are referred to as serotinous. Different species have developed different competitive strategies regarding pollination, seed dispersal, and growth habit. This slide provides a comparison between the competitive pollination strategy of catalpa compared to white oak. Catalpa rely on insects to disperse pollen from flower to flower, and so for this reason, this species maintains very showy flowers to essentially attract the attention of those insects. A species like white oak relies on wind for pollen dispersal rather than insects. And for this reason, the male flowers, as shown in the slide on the right, are long and slender. They're exposed to the wind and ready for a gust to blow the pollen around. And so the flowers aren't showy, but they're well designed to take advantage of wind dispersal. So seed dispersal strategies play out in a really similar way. The fruit type of a species has a lot to do with how that fruit and the seed within it is dispersed. This slide shows examples of species that rely on wind primarily for seed dispersal. The fruit these species develop are referred to as samaras, and their wing-like structure make them really well suited to be dispersed by wind. White ash, American elm, and red maple are examples of tree species that utilize this strategy. Some tree species rely on animals to disperse their seed. The fruit of these species tend to be protein and nutrient rich, and also in some instances showy to attract the attention of these animals, especially if birds are relied upon for seed dispersal. Acorns of oak species, hickory nuts, and beech nuts are all examples of fruits in which a seed is enclosed. These fruits, acorns, hickory nuts, they're referred to as hard mast, and they're really a preferred food source for a variety of wildlife that are reliant on the protein provided. Black cherry is an example of a tree that produces soft mast in the form of cherries, which are a preferred food source for many species as well, particularly a lot of bird species. And so when these fruits are ingested, often the seeds are left behind within the excrement, right? It kind of passes through the animal. In some cases, this is required for seeds to be prepared to germinate. Also in the case of hard mast species, often these acorns or nuts are buried by wildlife species for later use and forgotten about and just left to regenerate where they were buried. White mangrove is a really interesting species that relies primarily on water for seed dispersal. The species is found along watercourses, and the fruit of this species almost resembles a sailboat as it floats downstream to be deposited. Different species also deal with environmental stress in different ways. We already addressed how deciduous species cope with winter temperatures. And conifer trees present throughout the colder regions of the globe develop cold hardiness by dehydrating the tissue within their foliage. There's also chemical changes that occur to reduce the risk of winter injury due to the freezing of foliage in these species. This slide provides an example of how the crown shape of a tree may give it a competitive advantage or possibly a disadvantage depending on where it is growing. The red spruce on the left is really well designed with a conical shape. It's designed to shed heavy snow loads and heavy ice loads, and it makes sense as that those sort of conditions are really common to places where you'd find red spruce. The northern latitudes or higher elevations, at least here a little further south. So in comparison, the northern red oak on the right, with its relatively spreading crown, is indicative of many deciduous trees that are more adapted to climates with less severe winters. The last concept we're going to address in this lecture is a concept that we will be going back to often in this class, particularly when we start to discuss forest management strategies and silvicultural prescriptions meant to endorse the establishment of a particular tree species through harvesting. So trees can be classified by their capacity to reproduce and grow in the shade of other trees. Trees that do not thrive in the shade of other trees typically maintain strategies to compete vigorously in open growing conditions. Trees like yellow poplar and black cherry would be good examples of these trees. They grow quickly, and they allocate much of their photosynthetic material to height growth rather than root growth. These species are referred to as shade intolerant. Shade-tolerant trees like sugar maple and eastern hemlock don't grow as quickly and are outcompeted by shade-intolerant species in open growing conditions. They do, however, have the ability to germinate and remain viable below the main canopy in the shade of other trees for an extended period of time. This is something that the shade-intolerant species cannot do. So when a relatively small-scale disturbance occurs in the woods, this may be the falling of one tree or several trees in a group, whether that's through some sort of natural disturbance or whether it's through timber harvesting. The shade-tolerant species take the place of those trees. They are present in the understory below the main canopy, and they are well positioned to take advantage of the new growing space. Some species are intermediate in shade tolerance, including most of our oak species. In the southern Appalachians, white pine acts very much like an intermediate shade tolerant species. And red maple is also an example of an intermediate species as well. As forest managers, we really have little ability to alter the amount of nutrients in the soil. We have little ability to alter the moisture regime of an area, but what we can influence is the amount of sunlight a tree receives by manipulating tree density within the stand. For this reason, the level of sunlight a tree needs to become established and compete is really of the highest importance when we begin to wrap our head around some of our forest management decisions. And so just to wrap it up, trees are autotrophs. They are primary producers. They produce their own food through photosynthesis, and this is essentially the start of the food chain. So most other species rely on this process to survive. All trees have developed different competitive strategies to remain viable within various ecological settings. And as we went over last week, different biomes support different species for this reason. And that's it. So have a good week, guys.